Hi everyone, my name's Sam, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a book called Wolfstongue, which I've written. Here it is. Wolfstongue is published by Little Island, and it's illustrated by a wonderful artist, Anna Tromop, and it's written by me. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the story. I'm going to read you a bit of it, and I'll tell you something about where the ideas came from, and I'll give you a writing exercise that you can try yourself if you want to. Okay, so Wolfstongue is a story about a boy called Silas who discovers that there is a hidden world where animals speak. And what I'll do is I'll read the first few pages to you. At the beginning of the story, Silas is having a bad time. He's being bullied at school, and it's because of his speech. Silas has trouble with speech. He can't find the words that he needs. He can't get his words out in the way that he needs to. And so he's very, very quiet. He never speaks at school, and because of that, he's being bullied. As the story begins, he's on his way home from school. He goes home along a cycle path, and on the path, he has a strange encounter. So, there was a wolf on the cycle path. Silas walked along the path every day after school. It ran beside a patch of woodland. It was not the fastest way home, but Silas used it because he liked being by himself, and the cycle path was always empty. Until today. The wolf stood in the middle of the path, watching him. Its head was as high as his chest. He had never been so close to such a large, wild animal. He did not know what to do. He had seen wolves in a wildlife park once. They had been pale, silent shapes, slipping between the trees, too far away to seem dangerous or even quite real. But this wolf was real. He could hear it panting. He could see its wet red tongue and its long white teeth. At the sight, a chill crawled all the way from his shoulders to the base of his spine, and goose flesh tingled on his arms. His heart beat hard in his chest. He told himself he ought to back away carefully. He ought to run. But if I run, he thought, the wolf might chase me. Maybe I should flap my arms and shout so that it goes away. Wild animals are usually nervous of people, aren't they? But the wolf did not look nervous. It looked hungry. Its grey eyes were fixed on Silas, just waiting for him to start running. The narrow path was like a trap, with a brick wall on one side and a wire fence on the other. He held his breath. He kept very still. And then the wolf took a step forwards. Silas nearly ran. He nearly cried out in fright and fell over backwards. But he did not do this, not quite, because he had noticed something. The wolf was walking oddly. It was limping, barely touching the ground with one of its front paws. When it was almost within reach, it held up the paw as if it wanted to shake hands. Silas knelt down beside the wolf. The paw was larger than both his hands together. It had thick grey fur, hard black claws, and big rough pads. The smell was strong, but not bad. It was earthy and musky, and it reminded Silas of something. For a moment he could not tell what, but then he knew. The wolf smelled like the scent that rises from dry ground at the end of a hot day when the rain begins to fall. He moved the pads apart, and the wolf growled softly in its throat. Silas let go in a hurry, but the wolf whined and offered him the paw again. Being as slow and gentle as he could, he grasped the paw and tried to see what the matter was. Yes, he thought, something was lodged there, a metallic glint deep beneath the pads. The wolf gave a snarl as he eased the paw open, but it let him coax the object free. It was an old brass drawing pin, battered and bloody. It must have been digging into the paw at every step. The wolf circled away and took a few steps along the path, no longer limping. Then, all at once, it was alert, lifting its head and swivelling its ears as if it sensed danger. It prowled along the fence until it came to a place where the wire was torn at the bottom, making an entrance into the woodland. The grey eyes locked with Silas's eyes for a moment, and the wolf wriggled through the hole. The patch of woodland had perhaps 20 trees, with the backs of houses showing through the branches. There was nowhere for a large animal to go, but, as Silas watched, the wolf crouched in the undergrowth and disappeared from view. Silas stood at the fence, wondering if anything else was going to happen. But there was no movement among the trees. It was as if the wolf had never been there. That must be the end, he thought. It had been a brief, strange meeting, and now it was time for him to go home. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Good afternoon," it said. "This is a fortunate meeting." And the voice that he hears behind him is the voice of a fox, Reynard the fox, who is the leader of the foxes. And what Silas finds out is that in the world where animals speak, the foxes rule because they are the best speakers. The foxes are clever and cunning and articulate, and they can persuade and trick all the other animals into doing what they want with their clever words. And the other animals serve them, and above all, the wolves are the slaves of the foxes. The wolf that Silas has met is called Isengrim, and he has run away from the foxes, and the foxes are chasing him, trying to get him back. And so Silas finds that by helping out Isengrim, he is drawn into an adventure. I want to just read you a little bit more, actually. What happens just after the pages I've just read you is that a bad fox bites Silas in the ankle, and he's quite badly hurt, and Isengrim carries him to have his hurt healed, and they go into a place where Silas has never been before. So, a few moments later, Silas was digging his fingers into Isengrim's fur as the wolf loped along the path. The weight of a boy on his back did not seem to slow him down, and soon they were moving faster than Silas could run. Concrete, fence and hedge streamed past, then garden walls and the backs of allotments. Silas clung on. Ahead lay the end of the cycle path, where he would usually pass through a row of bollards on his way home. But now they did not reach the bollards, because Isengrim dived sideways, without slowing down, as if he meant to slam into the brick wall that ran beside them. Silas flinched, expecting an impact, but none came. When he opened his eyes, they were plunging along a passage with walls of mossy brick. He had never noticed the turning before. Dead leaves kicked up around them, and several times the wolf leaped over big dry branches, blocking the way. The walls drew closer together, and the moss thickened so that no more brick could be seen. Isengrim did not slow down. Silas tried not to cry out at the jolting pain in his ankle. Then, all of a sudden, they were out of the passage and into somewhere else. They were surrounded by trees, but not scrawny trees like those beside the cycle path. Everywhere, thick, twisted, mossy trunks reached up and tangled their arms into a canopy. Fallen branches hung in nets of creepers. The ground was a mass of roots. Leaves dripped. Silas looked back over his shoulder, trying to see how they had left the city behind, but all he could see was green twilight, great ferns and trunks flashing past. It was like racing through a maze of tunnels in some underground place. Isengrim slowed to a trot. The ordinary atmosphere of the city, its stale and reheated air, its low grumble of traffic, its thin cloudy light, had been whisked away like a dust sheet. Silas's senses were vibrating with the discovery that light, sound and smell could all merge together in one great glow. All around him the scent that breathed from the trees curled like mist, softening the sunlight and scattering it among the branches. Swaying shadows and leaves made droplets of brightness, and an endless whispering that wove with the warbling of birds to a vast hush, a sound bigger and deeper than silence. The smell of the air, so fresh and fine, was like a promise that something was about to happen, and that something was everything. Silas felt he could breathe it in forever. The trees grew thinner. The wolf came to a halt, and they looked out over the land. In front of them, a rocky slope dropped down to a band of loose stones. Beyond that, the woods began again. The landscape spread below was one enormous forest reaching to the horizon. The green beneath was broken only by a spur of rock here and a glimmer of water there. All Silas could think was that they had come into another world. Isengrim sniffed the air. "There's only one world," he said. The wolf sped up again, running along the ridge, an inch from the drop, sure-footed. Silas, confused, dug his fingers deeper in the hot fur. He must have spoken aloud without realizing it, he thought. "This is the forest," Isengrim said as he ran. "Your species lives here too. You just don't notice most of the time." And so Silas finds that he is drawn deeper into this world which is his world, but also not the world that he knows, as he helps the wolves to try and win their freedom back from the clever, articulate foxes. I would just like to show you some of the pictures. You see this wonderful cover by Anna Tromop. She's done beautiful green forest with all the different animals in it. And she's also done fantastic black and white illustrations inside the book. And I'm just going to show you a few of them because it helps you kind of get an idea of what happens in the story. So there's Silas riding on Isengrim's back through the forest. And as the story goes on, what else do we see? There's Tybalt the cat and Corax the raven, who'll come into the story a bit later. There's Reynard the fox sitting on the doorstep asking to come in. And what happens a bit later in the story is that Silas and the wolves go on a journey into the city where the foxes live. The foxes have an underground city. And at the front of the book, there's a map. I love a book with a map in the front. And here is Anna's map of the fox city. You can trace the journey that the characters make through the city, deep under the ground. And you can see there's one of the places that they find in the fox city. I've never had a book that I've written where someone has done illustrations for the story before, and it's very exciting. I love to see those. So let me tell you about the idea of the story, where it came from in the first place. When my son was a little bit smaller than he is now, I have 3 children, and my middle son, he was having trouble with his speech, and he also loved wolves. We still love wolves in our house. We love wolves and we love foxes, and we used to play wolves a lot. And at the same time, my son was having trouble with speech, and I was thinking about those two things together, and I just had the feeling that there was some connection between them, that the wolves and the words had some link, something to do with one another. And I wasn't sure what that was, but in my experience, that's often where stories come from, actually. Ideas are everywhere, but it's when 2 ideas bump into each other and lock together that a story starts to grow from them, is what I find. And so I started writing the story to try and find out what that connection was. Often it's when you don't know quite what it means, why there's a link, that you have to write the story to find out. So that was where it came from for me. And one thing I thought about quite a lot when I was writing this book was about the way that we human beings like to tell stories about other animals. We're the storytelling creature. We live in language in a way that no other creature does. But we love to tell stories about animals that make those animals mean things, that make them into symbols. So we say the wolf is big and bad. The wolf to humans, it means something scary a lot of the time. It means something hungry, something ravenous, which hunts and is fierce and ferocious and will never stop. But the wolf can also mean other things. It can mean an idea about the pack. It can mean loyalty, and it can mean an idea about freedom. We can feel that perhaps it would be nice to become a wolf. Perhaps it would free us. We make wolves mean all these things. We make foxes mean something about cunning and slyness. We say the fox is cunning and clever and sly. Or we might say, I don't know, cats are selfish. We'll say dogs are loyal. We say goldfish are forgetful. We tell all kinds of stories about animals. So what I have to suggest for you, for an exercise, is think of your favourite animal and then try and think of all the different stories that people usually tell about that animal. What do we usually make that animal mean? What kind of symbol is it for people? And then think of what the opposite of that would be. What would that animal be like if it meant the opposite? If it wasn't a big bad wolf, if it wasn't a clever, cunning fox, but was the opposite? And then think of a character who is that animal, who is that opposite, and write a story about that creature, or maybe draw a picture, and see what you make of it, see what they do. I hope that's interesting if you give it a go. And I hope that if you get a chance to read Wolfstongue, I hope that you enjoy it. It's been really good to speak to you about it. Bye bye for now.